Hi, and welcome to Dockside with Deb. In this weekly show, we'll talk to people who are doing some pretty cool things in sailing and experts in their field. I'm Deborah Diel, sailor, founder of MySail, and your host for today. Dockside with Deb is recorded live, so you can join in and ask your own questions. To find out more, head to mysail.team/Dockside with Deb. Let's get started. And first of all, big thanks to Elise, Katie, and Andy for joining me today on this episode of Dockside with Deb. For those who watched some of my earlier episodes, you'll probably recognize Katie, who filled in when I had doggy issues and wasn't able to make it for the interview with Will Ryan. So thanks for coming on again, Katie. And yeah, again, thanks to Elise and Andy. So today we're doing something a bit different. I've decided to do a panel and to have a bit of a chat with a few people who did their first Sydney Hobart Yacht Race in the last couple of years. And I wanted to get their experience of, how they went about working their way up to doing this event, what attracted them to do it, and how their experience was while doing the event as well. So we'll go around and talk to the three different panelists so that we can get their perspective on this. And just like usual, if you have any questions that you'd like to throw in there, there's a little Q&A section, so ask away. For anybody watching us on Facebook Live, if you have questions, just pop into the Zoom chat and ask us there. I will try to keep an eye out on the Facebook Live comments, but sometimes I miss them, so pop into Zoom if you can. So first, let's start with Elise, actually, if we can. Tell us a bit, Elise, about how you got into sailing initially.
So initially I started my mid-20s and I got sailing lessons for my birthday, and it's something that I'd kind of always wanted to do. So I sort of actually asked for them for my birthday, and and I sort of kind of went down the sort of keel boat beginner kind of lessons and everything like that. And then and I never really thought that I'd end up going racing, but I think probably within the first 6 months I'd sort of started racing and became completely hooked by it. So it sort of kind of snowballed from there, and that was about 10 years ago now. So yeah, it's been a pretty long journey, but it's been a fun one.
Yeah, wow. And so what did you start, when you started sailing, what type of boats or yachts were you sailing initially?
J24s. So it was with the sailing school in Rushcutters Bay. And
okay.
Easy boat, I guess, to start with, but definitely lots of other boats that you can learn from too.
And what attracted you to doing offshore racing?
I think, I guess I'm actually from a family who has a lot of people like in the Navy and have done kind of a lot of long offshore sort of adventures in that. And so I guess sort of my family members have always talked about their experiences at sea and how much they loved it, and kind of almost talk about it sort of in a romantic sense. And so I've always wanted to experience that for myself. And I think offshore racing sort of became a way of being able to experience it, but sort of have a bit more purpose or a bit more sort of fun with it.
Yeah, nice. And what was your first kind of offshore race? What would you say was your first kind of significant one?
I think I did some of the Blue Water Point Score. God, that must have been about wasn't that long ago, really, 2016. And that was, I think it was like the Newcastle Bass Island one, and that's the one that a lot of people don't like to do, and sort of say, I'm not going to do that one because like you go past Sydney and you're like, hey, we could go home or we can keep going and not enjoy this. So I got on a boat for that through a friend of mine, and it had been something that I'd sort of been trying to sort of kind of do for a while at that stage, but I'd sort of took a side path and went down small keel boats and dinghies on the way, and then came back to bigger yachts.
Mm. Nice. And what made you want to do the Sydney Hobart Yacht Race specifically?
Well, I think it's sort of, I guess, when you sail as much as you do in Sydney, as much as I was in Sydney, it's sort of the thing that everyone is kind of striving and aiming towards, and so you want to sort of join in and have those kind of stories and the fun that your friends are having. My partner had done his pretty early on in his sailing adventures, and my dad had done one as well. So, and growing up in Sydney, I guess it's something that you know, it's always present. It's, people talk about it year in, year out. It's sort of a kind of a way of life in Sydney that's something that you might want to do.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm just thinking, we've had many conversations about Sydney Hobart Yacht Race on this show through our various guests in different forums. So it is one of those kind of pinnacle, you know, events that people strive for.
Yeah. And I think that was, you know, once I've sort of got hooked onto sailing, I think it ended up becoming my big goal. And I've sort of now reached it. It took 10 years to get there, but I've got there. So it's actually quite satisfying to have achieved it.
Yeah, amazing. And so let's move over to Andy. Andy, I'm interested to know yourself, your story. How did you first get interested to sail, and how did you get started in sailing?
So it was when I moved to Sydney, basically. I grew up in the UK, not particularly near the water. Never really considered sailing as a good idea or a hobby that I'd want to get into. You know, the weather over there is not that nice a lot of the time. So I moved to Australia, and again, didn't really think too much about sailing. I ended up in an office with 8 people, and 2 of them had yachts. So I very quickly kind of started going out on the water, normally with a beer in hand, but I kind of liked to watch what they were doing with the sails. I'd look up, have a go on the helm, and I was like, oh, I kind of like this. So that's how I got into sailing. And then similarly, I went to the sailing school at Rushcutters Bay. I guess we don't want to plug it, do we? Or most people know what it means.
Yeah, that's fine.
And kind of started doing the J24 courses, which I found really fun. You know, coming from a kind of 38-foot cruising yacht where you're sitting there with a beer and pushing the autopilot buttons to move 10 degrees. To on a J24, you've got the tiller and the main sheet in your hand. It's quite exciting, quite fun.
Nice. So when did you do your first kind of sailing courses on the J24? And
it was probably about 4.5 years ago now.
right. So that's a really, you know, it seems like quite a quick progression from being a non-sailor to trialing it out and then kind of working your way through doing a major event like this. Tell us a little bit about that journey. So how did you kind of work your way through to, you know, doing offshore races?
Yeah, so I did a lot of cruising. So one of my colleagues, his boat's up in Pittwater. He'd bring it down to Sydney kind of every other weekend. He'd always ask me along. So I'd do a kind of lot of Pittwater to Sydney, Sydney to Pittwater returns. So that kind of gave me a little bit of kind of coastal experience. I had a rough idea of what conditions can be like, what the weather can be like. I did a lot of the courses at Rushcutters Bay, kind of quite enjoyed the J24. And then it was kind of, once you get comfortable in a J, you want to go to the next step, really. So I was lucky that I was doing sailing courses, getting a lot of kind of free experience with my colleague, and then I kind of found my sail and ended up on a wooden classic yacht. You actually were on there the first time I was on there and kind of showed me the ropes. And being a quite old-fashioned boat, it was a bit of a kind of baptism of fire. So I think I learned through a lot of mistakes in quite a short amount of time, and just kind of went from there.
Yeah, nice. And I think that's interesting, that learning from your mistakes. That's what we do with everything, isn't it? So that's totally cool. And the other thing that you mentioned is doing some of those deliveries up and down the coast. So for anyone who's looking to do some kind of longer races, that's such a great way to get some experience, is doing those kind of deliveries as well. And so Andy, what made you then, what kind of was your driver for wanting to do the Sydney Hobart Yacht Race?
I think it's two things. You know, it's iconic in Sydney. I'd watched the start a few times from the water and just the buzz and the atmosphere, and you've got helicopters and people all over the place. It just seemed really, really exciting, and the challenge almost. You know, it's when people talk about it, you hear a lot of stories about how horrible it can be, and you know how it's a kind of mental and physical challenge. So it was kind of the excitement and the challenge factor.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Andy. So Katie, I want to get you involved now. Katie, so thank you for your second appearance on Dockside with Deb. Tell us a little bit about, again, how you got started in sailing.
Okay, well, my journey's very different to the most sailors that I've met. I started quite late. I've been sailing for almost 4 years now, and didn't come from a family of sailors, knew nobody who sailed actually, and it was just something like I love the water and love boats, and I've always been attracted to, you know, being around boats and being at marinas and that sort of thing. So it was always something that was there, but I never did anything with it. And I remember when I was probably about 28 or so, I watched the Sydney Hobart Race, the start, and I just thought, wow, that looks amazing. I'm going to do one of those. And at that point, I'd never even been on a yacht. So I think I was on a cat once, but not a monohull. And that was always just there, sort of at the back of my mind. And I thought I'm going to do something with that sometime. And I remember I did a competent crew course when I was probably about 10 or 15 years ago now. And I loved it, but I realized how much effort would be required and how much time and commitment to actually becoming competent and getting where I wanted to go. And I didn't have that time to dedicate at that time. So I was like, okay, well, park that for a little while and come back. So I ended up then going and doing another competent crew course about just under 4 years ago now. And that was the next step for me in terms of, okay, let's make this happen and let's commit, and I had the time. So that's how I sort of got into sailing in terms of the starting point. Actually, I'm one of the success stories from my sail, as Deb knows. I met Deb at work, unrelated to sailing, but through her work with my sail, and we were sitting only a desk apart from each other, and kind of worked out what she did, and I thought, oh, this could be a way for me to actually meet someone who could help me get on a boat. So and Deb did that and got me on my first North Shore 39, and it was fantastic. So that was sort of my first step into actually like getting on a boat and doing something with the comp crew course.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, no, that was, and I think we actually have that North Shore 369 owner listening in as well. So,
yeah.
And so, you know, you spoke a bit about kind of your, I guess, attraction to the Sydney Hobart Yacht Race. How did you kind of go from, you know, competent crew course, first experience with sailing, how did you kind of work your way up through in 4 years, which again is really quick, to, you know, securing a spot for that race?
Yeah, well, I actually did, it was even less than 4 years. So I did my first Hobart after sailing for less than 2 years, which again, like really fast. But for me, I think the biggest, I was always been like, once I set my mind to something, I committed and got as much sailing in as I could, and did a lot of sailing on different boats. So I did one on, you know, a couple winter series on Viva on the 369, and then a few other SOPs and that sort of thing on another North Shore, and so there was like a lot of opportunities that were given to me that to do some extra sailing and twilights and things, and I always took those. But I think too, from what I experienced, sailing is very much about connection and people, you know, who you know, and they might hear about opportunities and know that you're looking for something. And so I realized that fairly early on, and the people that I was sailing with someone else, Howard, who's listening, he knew that I was looking for a position for Hobart, and so he kept his feelers out for me and put me in contact with the person I ended up going down with. So it's more, I think, for me, it was about, you know, taking every opportunity and using the people that I knew in sailing, and trusting them that, you know, they'd help me get there as well, as a big part of it. I think I didn't have the same lead up. I've actually done it backwards. So now doing smaller boats, but I started on the bigger boats. I've just bought a laser, as Deb knows. And so for me, it's all, you know, backwards, but I was so keen and committed to actually making it happen. I guess I was happy to break the normal rules of, you know, do this first X, Y, Z. And I'd only done one delivery before. I hadn't done any offshore work, but I knew I wasn't seasick. So I knew there were certain issues that I knew for some people, that I knew weren't a problem for me. And I just made sure that when it came to committing to a boat, that I could trust the person that I was sailing with. And he's had, I think, over 40 Sydney to Hobarts under his belt. So I kind of, even though I didn't have the experience, I knew the person I was going with and the crew I was going with had extreme amounts of experience. It was really good.
Yeah, nice. And I think what you kind of said too about it's kind of those connections and building those connections within the community. It's really important just to think about, you know, what you do when you're working. You know, you can put your application out on Seek with a website or something, which is great, and that works sometimes, but it's also developing those connections is really helpful. So yeah, so anyone who's looking to do kind of a race like that, you know, really trying to develop those connections, and then also you can kind of, you know, find people that you trust and learn from them and stuff as well. So yeah, I think that's a really good point that you made. Elise, let's pop back to you for a minute. I'd like to kind of just hear a little bit about your first Sydney Hobart. So you did the previous one last year, so 2019.
Yeah.
Who did you go down with? What was the experience like? You know, give us a little bit of an overview.
Yeah, so I had originally was supposed to do the race with another boat that I'd been sort of leading up and had done like a whole lead up regatta and series and everything with, and that was all looking really promising. And then they decided that they didn't want to race it anymore that year. And so I was sort of left in September with having done so much lead up and so much groundwork over the last 8 years, really, when I sort of think about it, to be kind of left hanging. And I mean, it's not their fault, but sometimes it happens. And so I actually am also a product of my sail. I am a bit of an introvert in some ways, in that I'm not really good at kind of talking to people that I don't or haven't been introduced to properly before. And so I used my sail as my platform to kind of self-promote for probably one of the first times I've ever done that. So I reached out to, I think, 3 or 4 different boats, 3 maybe, off the top of my head. And I kind of gave them a bit of a spiel about my experience. I'd had probably over 5,000 miles before. And so I kind of was attractive to people, which was good. I'd done lots of offshore, but I hadn't done this race. And so I'd sort of said that this was my ambition. So I got positive feedback from all the boats, but the one that I was really interested in was Wings. And they got me out within a couple of days. I think it was like the following Saturday I was out sailing with Wings, and we sort of hit it off pretty well. Ian's really lovely, and he's got this beautiful 46-footer that's only 2 years old, but it's already sailed nearly 20,000 miles in just that 2-year period. So he was really keen. He had a great program. Up front was very much like, I can't guarantee what's going to happen, but we'll give you a shot. So I did I think again, it was the Newcastle Bass Island race. That race keeps being the one that people don't want to do, and I'm always sticking my hand up for it. And we hit it off really well, and I got my spot given to me within 2 days, I think, of that race. And then I was sort of on the campaign for the rest of the year. I still sail with them. I really love sailing with them. But my kind of personal ambition was to be on the bow of the start of the Sydney to Hobart, especially the 75th, because it's quite obviously a big party and there was going to be 150 plus boats there. So I wasn't really sure if I was going to be on the bow for the start. And sort of even up until the day, I didn't really know whether that was going to happen. It was going to be me or the other bowman. And just sort of ended up being at the right place at the right time. And that was something that I just wanted to be there, kind of making the calls, helping the start, kind of being in the really gritty side of the decision-making process with the starts. So I love starts. I think they're the most exciting thing. And obviously Sydney to Hobart, you know, there's a beginning, a middle and an end. And the beginning was so exciting because, you know, there's like 4 start lines. There's just mayhem on some corners. There's some people didn't even make the second mark and they're, you know, trying to do, they've missed the mark and they're trying to sort of come round again and get back into the mark. But meanwhile, there's like 20 boats heading straight for that mark. It was completely chaotic, but it was amazing. I think that was probably that. And then obviously we entered Storm Bay at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we had this just dream run of a kite run up Storm Bay. And yeah, I couldn't imagine that race being any more glorious than what it was. It was such fantastic weather. I was very, very, very lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And that's such a
cool long story of it.
No, that's such a cool story about the bow as well. It is exciting to be on the bow for the start. How did you find being on the bow for the rest of the race? Between Storm Bay, there's a lot of space in there for
it was cool. Well, Wings has got a pretty good philosophy in that we share things fairly well. And so we did have another bow. So they made sure that if I was off, I was off, and then the next person was on. So that was pretty good. It was fine. Again, I think we didn't experience any more than 25 knots. We didn't get any more than 2 meter seas, and I have been out in 6 meter seas and 50 knots, and so I was mentally prepared for that, and we didn't get any of it. So being on the bow for that was, we unfortunately lost the kite we really needed after I made a comment of, gee, that kite looks really, really strong. It looks impressive. And then I went down for a nap and I came up and it was completely gone.
Oh, no.
So I won't ever make that comment ever again. But yeah, because the conditions were so favorable, it was pretty good. We only had one mishap, which was the kite did wrap around the 4th stay in the middle of Bass Strait, and it's the first time I've ever said no to something that I didn't feel comfortable with doing. I'm normally the person that always does the kind of, oh yeah, no problem, I'll go and do it. I'll climb up the mast at sea. I'll do this, I'll do that. But this involved having to climb the mast and go down the 4th stay. And I'm not a very big person, and I don't have a huge amount of upper body strength. And I rigged up for it because we couldn't get it down. Basically, it was just so intensely wrapped. And I was just about to go up, and I sort of said, I can't do this. And that's the first time I've ever had to admit to that. But thankfully, we've got such a amazing group of people on board that Mick put his hand up and said that he'll do it, and he didn't even hesitate. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge we had on board. And then he was up there for about nearly an hour, so it was very tough on him physically.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. I think that's interesting and this is kind of where you've got a crew of whatever, whether it's 8 or 10 or 12, or it's a number of people, and everyone has their different strengths. And so, you kind of do have to play to what those strengths and weaknesses are and balance that out. And like you said, with having the 2 bow people, that's, especially in some of those key positions, is having kind of redundancy in the crew as well, makes so much sense. So it's not, everything doesn't come down to one person all the time, and you can kind of switch that up a bit. And it's interesting. I think I wanted to talk to Andy about that a bit as well. So Andy did his first Sydney Hobart this year as well, 2019 actually, and he got to do the bow with me. So poor Andy had to come with me for 4 days. So I'd be interested to hear, and you can say whatever you want. This is an open forum. But interested to hear about, your experience, Andy, and kind of the lead up and training for doing your first Sydney Hobart, and, how you went and during the event itself.
Yeah, so I actually did the Noumea race, the same boat 2 years ago, and you weren't there that time, and it turned out to be a kind of boring 6 days on starboard tack with only 2 kite sets. And I thought, oh, this bow works easy. I can handle this. Just a few sail changes. And for the Hobart, thankfully you were there, because there's a little bit more involved. But I didn't get to do the start either. But I think you were probably the best bet to be there at the start and the finish. The training, I think, compared to some boats, I imagine you'll agree, we didn't have the kind of toughest regime for training. It was quite a short one. We did a couple of offshore races and then a few SOPs, but nothing major. But it was good fun. I think we got lucky with the weather this year. It was again, compared to Noumea, the only thing I can really compare it to, the seas were flat and the breeze was low. I think, did we reef once in the whole race?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but it definitely wasn't a lot.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it was great fun, and I think I got so lucky with the weather.
Yeah, look, it was pretty decent weather for what you can get. But that being said, I don't think that detracts from what you do. You can't help the weather, whether it's good or bad. You just kind of have to take it. So, and also, look, you would have been totally fine without me on bow as well. But it was great to have you. Great to have you there. Sorry, go ahead.
My fondest memory was being sound asleep, and Bill Wright heard something happening up on deck and kind of said, Andy, you better get up there and help them. So I got my skins on, jumped up, went up there, and got told to go back down. I'm not needed. So it was,
That's good. Never complain when you get told to go back to sleep. You're like, cool.
I would have much rather stayed asleep, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it was all good. And it did help being a light year. It just made maneuvers obviously a bit easier to do, shorter.
If you did cabbage tree, it wasn't a light year. that was the baptism of fire. That was a horrible race this year.
Yeah, you always get you have to get 1 or 2, don't you? They can't all be good. So it's like Andy said, we didn't have a huge amount of training races in the lead up to Hobart, which was made that a bit easier from that point of view. But we've all done a lot of stuff before and stuff together, so kind of made that preparation for Hobart, for us at least, a lot easier. So Katie, jumping over to you, tell us, so you did the 2018 event, so you had, obviously different weather than what we had. Tell us a little bit about your experience. What was the conditions like? What was your experience overall?
Yeah, so I was on an older boat, so not one that I'd been used to sailing on before. And to be honest, I got the call to join the crew only in late November, like the last week of November. And so as a crew, we actually hadn't spent much time sailing together at all. I think I went out on the boat with them 3 times. There was still some boat work being done, just like some final things with rigging, etc. So it just meant that we couldn't spend as much time together as we'd all planned in terms of other racing. And so that kind of made it a little bit, for me, especially being my first, I was quite nervous in the lead up, and hadn't sailed with any of the crew before, and they were all sort of, as I was saying before, extremely experienced. So I was trusting their experience and the fact that they'd been through a lot of difficult Hobarts and a lot of offshore racing, a lot of competitive racing, and so that sort of I guess relied on that to put my mind at ease for the start. The 2018 race was pretty good conditions again, so nothing too crazy. We had a rundown. At one point, it was actually quite funny. So the person that built the boat, so it was Mark Twain, and Speezy got a sail out, and I was sort of helping, doing a lot of packing of sails, and saying he was testing different sails on the way down, ones that we sort of hadn't put up before, and one went up, and we're like, "Oh, this is interesting." He's like, "Yeah, it's a blooper," and I was like, "Okay, I've never seen that one before." That's something that you don't see very often around the harbour, and certainly, it's an older type of sail, but it was pretty cool. So we were playing around with the sails, and we sort of found what worked, and on the way down, as I was saying, it was a pretty good run. But I think the worst conditions that we had, I remember crossing Bass Strait, and it wasn't forecast actually. We had 40 knots and quite big swell. And I remember sitting on the rails thinking, "Oh, this is bloody awesome. This is so cool. This is exactly what I'm here for, is just to feel this and to feel the extremes. Like, that's not extreme compared to a lot of what people have experienced with Hobart before. But for me, that was probably the strongest conditions I'd been in. And I really loved it, actually. I really loved it. And because there was only 7 of us on the boat, we had a floating navigator and just a shift to 3 each. So you pretty much got called up for every sail change, for anything significant. And that again was a newer experience. I was used to sailing on larger boats with more crew and being involved in everything. And I was a bit of because of my experience or lack thereof at that point in time, I floated. So I did a bit of brace, I did a bit of bow, packed a lot of sails, kind of did some trimming, all sorts of things. And so it was actually provided a really fantastic experience from my perspective, given that was my first trip down. I do also, because it was an older boat, I wasn't quite used to the layout underneath and just how little head space you have. And I swear to God, I lost a couple inches by hitting my head constantly the front of the boat, like having sails come down and packing in the middle of the night. And I had this tiny little head torch, and the person who owned the boat, Speezy, didn't want to see any light naturally, and I'm trying to keep my little red light, focused down so I can see what I'm doing. And I swear to God, it was a bit hectic at times, but it was awesome. And I love that challenge. But I came out with so many bruises from all the hitting my head and all the timber and everything. It was it was pretty funny, but yeah, at the time a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, it sounds like it would have been. Although I love that you were, sitting, like you said, sitting in, big swell and 40 knots in the Bass Strait and loving every second of it. Because we put ourselves there, right? So kind of what it's all about. And how about, Storm Bay up the Derwent and arriving in Hobart is always, a really exciting time, and some beautiful scenery around there if people haven't been. What time of day did you kind of round Tasman Island and do that part of the race?
So it was late afternoon, or sort of mid-afternoon. We actually finished around 5 o'clock, and it was quite slow going up the river. And we were going reasonably well, and the wind completely dropped out for us. So we were absolutely drifting for a while there, and it's so frustrating. It was actually after everything that we'd been through, and then just to sit there and, to rock backwards and forwards and watching other boats go ahead of us, and ones that we'd sort of been keeping, at bay for quite some time. And then at some point going, are we going backwards? Like, is this actually happening? So it was sort of frustrating, but then again, we picked up some wind as we came around into the river, and it was much better. We had a steady pace, and ended up, making some reasonable distance after that. What I wasn't aware of, actually, which was really cool, and I'm glad I didn't know, was when we came in, and then you talk about the atmosphere. I had no idea that there were people that would be along. What's the festival called?
Taste of Tassie.
Yeah, that's right. And where everyone was seated, like having drinks, and it was perfect time of day as well because it was like 5 p.m. So I'm sure people had a few bottles, and I had a friend there, and I just kind of stopped and went, "Oh my god!" And everyone's cheering, and it was just like, wow! It just kind of really, it blew my mind. And we'd sort of been at sea for 5 days, 5 days, 5 hours, something like that, and I was very happy to come back and to see, all these people, and to sort of still feel that excitement, because I knew that we'd be some of the last boats coming in, and I didn't know what to expect, whether there'd still be people around or whatever. But it was actually really good. It was a great experience, and definitely a highlight.
Yeah, that's right. Like it is so exciting, isn't it, when you arrive, especially in the middle of the day. Andy and I had kind of a similar experience going up the Derwent as you did, with no wind, although I've been in the Derwent in other years with 50 knots of wind, so not quite sure what's better. But, thinking about that kind of when you arrive, Andy, how would you describe how you felt when you arrived in Hobart for the first time?
Oh, awesome. I mean, to backtrack a little bit, we went around the nice part of the famous picture, whatever that bit's called, at midnight or something, didn't we? So
Tasman Island.
Yeah, that's it. I didn't get any iconic views there. We had a bit of a night bobbing around, so getting into Hobart was great. I'd never been down there before. It was it 40 degrees or something? It was a crazy hot day.
It was hot.
We came alongside, and one of our crewmates, he like most sailors, he likes to drink, so he very quickly got us a case of beer on board, and didn't really stop from there. I think it was it was fantastic. Thankfully, it didn't take us five days. We did it just under 4, I think, right?
Yeah, Katie wins the prize on this panel for the longest first trip to Hobart, and I think at least you're probably on the shorter end out of the three.
I think we're 3 days and 12 hours or something like that.
Yeah, nice. It's still exciting when you arrive, though. Like, how about you? Like, how did you guys go when you kind of pulled up to Constitution Dock?
We pulled up at the 6:45, so that's like the perfect drinking hour for taste. There's just like people everywhere, and they don't even care whether they are interested in sailing or not. They're like, people, yeah! And so we just loved it. We absolutely lapped it up. I'd been to Taste before, and I was there when my partner did his first Sydney Hobart, so I kind of knew what to expect. And I was just so happy that we arrived at that time, and that we had just such a stellar day that day, because it would have been a bit sad to have turned up at midnight or 2 a.m. or and not had that. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but they've actually stopped Taste Festival for this year, which is a bit sad. So anyone that's doing it this year is probably not going to get that experience if they haven't had it before. Bit sad. Yeah.
It is a bit of a shame. I guess, though, I have been down myself at the dock at 4 a.m. or other random times, and there is still people around. It's not quite the same.
Absolutely.
It's not the same crowds, but there is people around all the time, so you always get a bit of a cheer in no matter what time you get there, which is
that's true.
part of the kind of amazing atmosphere of finishing in Hobart. It is such an amazing atmosphere. And we have a question from the audience who is asking, and so I might just kind of touch base with all three of you on this, is around qualifications like first aid, radio, safety at sea. Elise, did you do any of these qualifications? Do you think that's something that helped you get your crew position and helped you during the event?
I hadn't had my radio. I got my first aid all the time through surf life saving, but what are they? The first aid, radio, and safety at sea. Safety at sea, I had that. I've had that for years, and I thought that was an absolute must. I didn't really want to put myself in a position where I was knocked back because I didn't have, between me and one other person, and the difference was that they had their SSSC and I didn't. So I don't want things like those qualifications to be a barrier. And you can support like marine rescue and do your radio with them, and at least the money goes to a non-for-profit, and it's kind of nice. And so I think it's definitely worthwhile doing all of them. And it also is good when, not everyone on board has experience with the radio, and, if somebody can't get to it, then you just take over. And I think, it's absolutely important to get all of those.
Yeah, it's a good point with the radio as well, is that, I've had many times where, people have asking for crew for, especially, Newcastle Bass Island or one of the other Blue Water Point Score events, and they need a last minute crew to fill that radio position because they don't have it. So that's a big one. So anyone who's looking to do some offshore blue water racing, go and get your radio certificate because there's opportunities that come up because people just need to fill that.
Just don't have it. Yeah, it's really
exactly. And that's then you're getting out, you're getting the experience, you're doing that networking, you're getting on a boat. So even if that doesn't directly lead to something, that's if you're kind of trying to work your way into doing more offshore, that's a really good one to have.
Building your sailing resume.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But all three of those are important to have that knowledge and for the safety, and you do need to tick those boxes, but radio is one that has come up quite a few times. So
that was actually, I was asked to do it before the race, so they needed a second person. So yeah, definitely I agree. Having that certification is really good. Unfortunately, I haven't used it as much since, and I'll probably need to refresh, but it's good to have. And sea safety as well. That was just a given, and compulsory now too, I think. So
yeah, that's right. Andy, did you do any of the courses, certificates?
Yeah, I've done my radio certification. I did safety at sea as well. I mean, safety at sea is more just a personal thing. You're putting yourself in that position. Didn't just do it to fill a quota, but do it because ultimately my life would be on the line. Radio, I've done it, and much like Katie, I've forgotten most of it. Thankfully, on King Billy, I think I'd be like 7th or 8th in terms of having to actually use the radio. So by the time it got to me, no one would be judging me getting the tuning wrong or anything like that. So
yeah, no, I think that's a good point you make too about it's not just to fill the quota, it's important knowledge to have if you're going offshore, and to be self-sufficient and to be able to help the crew and help your boat and take care of yourself. So yeah, no, it's a really good point. So Andy, anybody else, like maybe besides kind of qualifications, if you were speaking to somebody who wanted to do their first Sydney Hobart Yacht Race or any kind of major offshore event, what tips or advice would you give them?
I think we've covered a lot of it. It's for your first race, it's probably not going to be what it's going to be who so say hello to people in the bar and be enthusiastic. Secondly, I think it's commitment. People want people that can turn up to every training session, that can help with the boat work. Obviously, helping with the boat work's a good thing. You learn your way around the boat, you learn where everything is, you learn how everything works. And the more you know about the boat, the more likely the skipper or the owner is going to trust you to come on a long ocean race. So I think it's kind of enthusiasm, networking, and learning.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I like it. And that boat work, that's really a good point as well, is understanding the boat, again, for your own personal safety, as well as just being useful and being able to kind of, do stuff when you're out in the middle of the ocean. So Katie, how about you? Any tips or kind of thoughts for people who want to do their first major race?
I think, beyond being connecting with other people, I think showing, for me, what's worked really well, the feedback that I've got from people that I sail with is the commitment, turning up and kind of going above and beyond, and not being the last one that turns up to a race, in preparation for a race, even if it's like a SOPS or even, like twilights, whatever it is you're doing, not being the last person that turns up and, sticking around and helping out. I think showing that you're super committed and you're interested. And I typically ask a lot of questions and try and learn a lot as well. And it just, I don't want to be seen as someone who's just coming in and going as I please. It's sort of I know skippers really appreciate when they see that you care as much about the boat as they do, and certainly about the competition. And then also my personal thing, and it's not necessarily going to apply to everybody, but for me, I try and stay as fit as I can. So I'm now sort of doing some more bow work and that sort of thing. So it's really important, and really, to be agile as well. Again, that's just one less blocker, I suppose, when people can trust that you can haul a sail, from the back to the front, etc. And it just takes away that uncertainty, that you're able to do what you're setting up to do.
Yeah, that fitness is a good point as well that we haven't covered, and also just so you can feel as good as you can feel and get through a few days, with limited sleep and stuff, because it does start to kind of play on you, obviously, when you're out for so long. But if you start with a good kind of level of fitness and strength, then you can kind of manage that a little bit better. Thanks, Katie. Elise, how about you? Any other tips or advice to or what do you think is really important from your point of view?
Well, I mean, I've never been a good networker, so I think any of those people who can do that, that's wonderful. Like, keep working on that. I think, just to sort of say something a bit different, is actually try and learn as many roles as you can on a boat. So I think when I've noticed that probably what's been my strength is that I've been able to fill every role on the boat at some point. And so that means that kind of being able to jump into a position and go, yeah, I can do that today, or, oh, okay, you've got that person whose strength's there, how about I go and do this? I think has been really helpful. So you can, if you haven't been offshore, or if you haven't done an offshore race, and maybe you've done lots of offshore passages or something like that, try and get around to every single role on the boat and become familiar with every single role and how that affects the next person and how that affects the next person. Because the more versatile you are on the boat, I think the greater the chances that you're going to get picked over somebody who maybe, not as, might be more committed to staying in one area. And I think that will increase anyone's chances of being sort of chosen to do more offshore.
Yeah, no, really good. Thank you. We just had a couple questions or notes on Facebook as well, so I'll answer those if those people are still listening, or to the best of my ability. So they're asking about cost and how much it should cost as a crew member, which is an interesting one, because if you go down on a commercial operation, they can cost upwards of $10,000 plus for the training and to go down and do all of that. If you're going down on somebody's individual boat, technically, like if it's not a commercial operation, you're not supposed to pay, but there's often you'll do a cost sharing arrangement or something like that. So it all depends on the kind of yacht and who you're going with. And if it's commercial, of course, you're paying for that. And if it's non-commercial, then often, you're sharing costs of, your food and stuff. And there are kind of limits to what that should be. So, and if you're not sure about that, then, ask the race organizer would be a good kind of place to go if you feel like you're being asked for more than what you probably should be, or if you're not comfortable, then don't do it. But so cost is kind of completely variable, and it depends on what you're doing is kind of how that generally works. And look, we don't have any more questions coming through, and so I think what we'll do is we'll end it there, unless anybody had something that they were kind of still really keen to point out to the group. But again, thank you, Elise, Andy, and Katie. Thank you so much for coming on tonight and for sharing all of your experience and your stories and kind of insights with us and with this group. And yeah, good luck for all of your kind of future races. And I'm sure I'll see all of you guys out on the water soon.
Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you'd like to know more about this program or the MySail app and community, head on over to mysail.team. That's mysail.team. Until next time, stay safe and happy sailing.